Right, let's discuss this further then. We are joined via Zoom by Prof David Monyae. He's an associate professor of political science and international relations at the University of Johannesburg. Prof, always a pleasure to see you. A very good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon.
Prof, let me start by talking about what Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula said there while speaking to SABC News there. She said that South Africa hasn't articulated its stance on this particular matter. That makes it sound as though, as a signatory to the Rome Statute, there is a choice whether or not to oblige to what you have signed up for. There is, as it seems, and if one reads it correctly, an obligation, a duty, and further so an obligation on the part of signatories of the statute to do as they said they would. So where does South Africa stand on this particular matter as a signatory? Is there indeed a choice on this matter?
The situation is not quite clear, but if you listen to what the Speaker of National Assembly have just mentioned, as well as the Minister of DERCO, I think you'll realize that South Africa is trying to get the legality out of the way. It's seeking legal advice, but in a situation like this, also to reach out to ICC to ensure that there might be a way out of this particular crisis. But the other options, which are much more political, that's available to South Africa. One of it is to go back to President Jacob Zuma's era and pull out. It's as simple as that. However, negotiating for an exemption, it's not something that one will expect positive answers, given the fact that this matter has geopolitics underpinnings to it, that bigger powers are therefore there to pin down South Africa firstly, as well as to emulate President Putin. And I don't think they're in any position to give South Africa a way out of the dilemma that it is in.
Yeah, if there is perhaps a loophole, what is that loophole? I mean, we've been in this situation before, but what is that loophole when it comes to what the Rome Statute says on the matter? How do we, in other words, how do we get out of this? Say Putin lands here, and we now have this expectation to arrest the man. What are the loopholes? How do we, sort of get out of that? I heard the DA leader saying something like, if I was advising President Cyril Ramaphosa, I would say, hey, listen, Putin, best you don't actually come. But what do you think would be the best way, in fact, to get out of this, should Putin actually arrive?
I think that the DA leader is unaware of, and if I was also advisor to President Ramaphosa, I would say that we have a lot of interest, not just political interest with Russia. We have South Africans in Russia, as well as the statements made by the Russians themselves that any country that arrests its own leader, it's a declaration of war.
Yeah.
So I think the big question for DA leader is that, is South Africa ready to go to war with Russia? The answer is simple, no. We are in no position to meet Russia head on. I mean, given what we all see is happening in Ukraine, and power dynamics at a global level. So I think what this leaves South Africa is on trying to find the loopholes that we really do not know whether the ICC will allow South Africa to have this important meeting, as BRICS is a key platform for South Africa's own foreign policy objectives. And therefore, I think what we have are these contradictory situation that South Africa, either way, any of the options, it will leave South Africa in a really serious problem, as it will be dealing with legal issues that deal with its own constitution by signing to the ICC, it means that it is obliged to arrest on one hand, but pragmatically speaking, it's something that cannot be achieved.
I mean, you've touched briefly there on some of the repercussions. At an extreme level, you raise, the issue of war, and perhaps on a smaller issue, you raise the fact that, we have Russians living here, there are South Africans living in Russia, and I think Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula touched on that to say, we don't really know, what the implications of, this possible arrest would then be for South Africa, not just South Africa, but for Africa at large. And I wonder if, we could sort of unpack those possible implications for the continent. And it seems that you do believe it could go to the point of war, but would it? Would Russia actually declare war on South Africa should we take the stance to actually arrest Putin?
There's no doubt about that. I think to arrest a leader of his stature, this is a man that carries a briefcase with the nuclear buttons in it. And like United States head of state, the US, you can't touch American president, even deputy vice president for that, or any other official of the United States, given its power in the world. That's a realistic way of looking at the situation. So what it means is that South Africa will have to look at the legal team that will advise how best to handle the situation, the implication to its own constitution first and foremost, and more importantly also look at how this will have an implication on its hosting of an important platform. That is very important in terms of South Africa's achieving its foreign policy objective. As it stands, I really do not see any way out other than invite him and pull out if I was an advisor to the president. It does seem as though we have this, good, I suppose one could say, close relationship with Russia. And, you look at the issue of BRICS, it does seem that there are close links there. I'm putting you in a difficult situation here, but because nobody knows what happens in Putin's mind. But do you think that, where Putin is, he might be thinking, these are my friends. Let me not put them in this precarious situation. Let me actually not just go to the summit after all, just to avoid South Africa being put in this difficult position, because it does seem as though South Africa's damned if they do, damned if they don't. I think it's hard for President Putin to do so. And there are a number of other options in which South Africa could prefer to host this in another country, BRICS country. Russia itself to host, and all head of states going to Russia. But at this stage, it doesn't appear that is one of the options at play. Given the situation at a global level and playing in our own country, I think what we see with all political parties in South Africa, historically, black parties seem to be supporting the hosting of BRICS and not to arrest President Putin, and perceived white parties, DA and others, pro-Western world. It's dividing the country, racial as well as ideologically, in terms of where do you stand on global issues. And the questions that are asked by majority of parties are questions that the DA is not answering, in terms of what do you say about what happened in Iraq, in Syria, what's happening in Libya, and all other inconsistencies of the ICC. They seem to be quiet and not taking a position. So it brings a dilemma to the country, to its politics, to its constitution, and therefore a way should be found in the next 3-4 months to really prepare for a big summit such as one on BRICS.
All right, Prof Monyae, it's always a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you very much for giving us your time, sir. All right, that is Prof David Monyae, who's an associate professor of political science and international relations at the University of Johannesburg.